Hey everyone, Michael and John, thank you for joining me today.
Good to
Thanks
be
for
here.
having us.
Awesome. So, I haven't actually seen both of you at the same time in a very long time, but for our listeners and watchers, we've done some business together, the three of us. And I think we're in a good position to talk about today's topic, which is are we in a bubble? Because we have varying levels of degrees of, familiarity with this topic, but, both of you lived through the last housing bubble. So we're going to kind of compare things today and talk about where we think things are at and try to give our listeners, a really good opinion because it's easy to get confused when you're reading articles that talk broadly about housing bubbles. DC is obviously completely different and separate. So we want to really specifically talk about what's going on here. So I don't know. How should we get things started here? Michael?
Well, so as old as Allison thinks I am, I did not actually live through the last housing bubble, but John did. So I caught it very at the tail end in 2009. So, John, can you tell us a little bit about that and what happened during 2008?
Yeah, so this topic is probably so. Yesterday, I actually was cataloging it. I had 8 client conversations, and 7 of the 8 asked the very specific question: "Do you think this is a bubble?" Because a lot of what we talk about is, one, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish with your purchase? Why do you want to purchase? How long you're going to be in the house? So there's a lot of strategy into figuring out price points and all those things. And then at the very end, we start talking about contract strategy. Like, okay, well, now that we know you want to and you can, how do you win when you find the perfect place? And that's probably the bulk of the conversation. And in that conversation comes out like, hey, you might find a place and there might be 15. There was one yesterday, 32 people, 50 some people. Like, it's kind of crazy in certain spots. Um, how does a seller choose yours over someone else's? And then, of course, the pending question: are we in a bubble? Like, is this healthy? Should I be buying right now? And I think the great perspective that I can bring is going through 2007, 8, 9, and 10, and where I became a counselor, sort of like a life coach, for lack of better words, where all the people that I worked with in 2005, 6, 7 that started foreclosing, having bankruptcies, short selling, divorces, as a result of fractured relationships, they moved into bad school districts and kids started having problems. Like, I felt all of those stories of all of my past clients. So I feel like I was able to reflect on that period of time and say, okay, what happened? What drove all of that? And then how is this different? Is it different? And I think the best way to try to bring some differences and why I actually think that we're not in a bubble, because I think a bubble is defined as extreme froth where everything is rising, everyone thinks it's going to go up forever, and then all of a sudden there's a mindset shift and there are no buyers and prices plummet. And you could just name, several stocks in the past that have made these parabolic up. GameStop, right? So GameStop stock went from like nothing to like 400, back to nothing, back to 400, and that was all just trading, greed. And that was what drove the past housing crisis. So it was mostly greed from lenders, greed from the real estate community, greed from the home buyers, right? Everyone said, let's get rich owning real estate. And it was driven by really easy lending. There's the greedy lenders. People didn't have to put any money down. If they didn't qualify, they could just lie about their income or do a no ratio loan, and they could get a loan for what they wanted. But why they wanted it is because they were going to get rich buying it. So the difference between now and then is that I'm going to get rich conversation isn't a piece of it. It is I'm tired of renting. I see rates are low. I see the tax advantages. I do see the longer term wealth effects of owning a home. If I want to paint my walls whatever color or hang lights that I want to hang, like, I want to be able to do it and not have to call my landlord and not have to move every 2 years. I'm seeing a lot of cash. So 2006, 7, no cash down. 2020, 21, 10, 15, 20, 50% down. I think I see every home buyer. Now, remember, we're also talking about home buyers, which are probably, the better 70% post-COVID, people that retain their jobs. They didn't have to pay any of their student loan debt for a year. Their 401ks have gone up tremendously. Their parents' 401ks and wealth have gone up tremendously. So there's a lot of money just sloshing around out there. And these values are being pushed up by people putting big down payments. And that's just structurally very, very different.
I also want to just jump in real quick to say when we talked about having this topic as an episode, I was thinking, okay, what really is a bubble, right? And how would we compare them all? And as you're talking, I was thinking, well, a bubble pops at some point, right? And based on all of the things that you're talking about, and that we're going to get into a little bit more, I don't see how this is going to pop. How the situation we're in right now, because of the nuances of what's happening. There are certainly subsections of the market that possibly can't withstand the level or the degree of growth that's happening right now. But it's not the whole market. It's not everything like it was back in 07, 08, 09, where like literally the whole industry collapsed. So I agree with you that this is not a bubble, that there are parts and subsections that have to be dealt with differently. But yeah, I'm glad you've kind of covered it the way you have, and that it just kind of clarified in my mind about the whole actual bubble, thing.
Yeah, and I do think, like, are there bubbles? Yes, I think. Is the market a bubble? No. So when you said little subsets of markets, so think late 2020, everyone all of a sudden wanted to buy a house in the mountains. And those houses went bananas. If it was a $200,000 house somewhere in the hills of West Virginia, now there's a whole bunch of people in DC flush with cash. They've retained their job. They're working from home. They're not eating out, spending money. They're not on planes traveling. So what are they going to do? They're going to go to the mountains. And these are people that have never hiked in their life. They just like, oh, I'm just going to buy a house in the mountains because I need space because COVID's going to wreck the world. And next thing you know, they justified these prices by looking at Airbnbs that were in the moment. And of course, I looked at it and said, well, go look at Airbnb 2 years ago. No one wanted to be there. So are there bubbles out in these like deep second home spaces? I think so. I think, are there bubbles in some of these areas where the DC quote unquote rich buyer, high income, lots of cash, they move right out into the sort of the suburban area, and they see value that they don't see in DC, and they just go crazy and overpay by 100 grand. So are there little bubbles that are sort of like percolating there? Maybe. But broadly speaking, I think there's a level of health based on income, cash down, liquidity, low debt levels. When you look at DC Metro, DC proper, even up through sort of the Baltimore corridor, I don't see a lot of froth there where all of a sudden people just say, I'm done, I'm not buying anymore. The other thing that drives property is easy lending. So low down payment loans, and the loan limits in the DC metro area are 822,000. So to kind of put that in perspective, someone only needs about $60,000 to buy an $860,000 house, including closing costs. So I think that area sub $1 million becomes now a super safe market because financing's easy. You're not relying on jumbo financing anymore. And then because second mortgages are also a little easier, and a lot of credit unions that have favorable tax treatment, they can kind of facilitate low million prices using a Fannie Mae loan and a second mortgage. That loan structure is easy and effective and inexpensive. So I think now all of a sudden we go up to the 1.2, 1.3 range of having healthy, sustainable lending. So maybe above that, could there be some froth? Sure. But I think broadly speaking, most of the people that we're talking to, certainly all first-time home buyers, I think you could just take a dart and throw it at a map. And as long as it hits somewhere around DC, Northern Virginia, 495 out 15 miles, you just buy it. If we fast forward life 10 years from now, you'll be glad you did.
I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is a combination of like three things really. I mean, I think people have been sitting in their houses for a year. They know what they want, they know what they don't want, they know what they want space. So we're seeing a lot of competition in the family home market. A lot of people wanting outdoor space, regardless of the market, condo or single family home. I think interest rates are low, so people are looking at it and going, okay, well, I was looking at getting this 2-bedroom condo and paying this 2 years ago. And now the payment looks roughly the same and I'm making more money to get a house. So why wouldn't I? And then I think everyone's also seeing that because of the way things are going, you buy it now and it's 700, you buy it 2 weeks from now and it's 750. So there a lot of people are kind of just trying to get into the market before that prices them out, I think, is what a lot of people are looking at. But at the same time feeling so much richer because they have more money in their pocket and interest rates are low.
And let me ask both you a question so what you just said, Michael, a lot of demand in the single family space, which clearly we're seeing. So everything from, again, speaking more DC centric, Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, Hyattsville, Chevy Chase, Bethesda, Rockville, and then all the way out through Alexandria, Arlington, and you can push out through Fairfax County, Annandale, right? So those are all the hot spots of single family homes. What is your feeling on condos moving forward? When I look at all the loans that we do corporately in the DC metro area, it used to be 50-50 condo single family. And now there's this massive swing where it was like 80-20, 20% condo. And my personal feeling is, just talking with employers of the area, is that people will be back in the office. People will be back to work. People will think, oh, the cities are cool again. And that maybe that there's a little opportunity there for condo buyers. What's your thought on that?
I mean, I think with what I do has always been about 80% buyers. And right now I'm spending most of my life in Hyattsville, in Rockville, in all of these outlying areas, looking at single family homes in the $400,000 to $500,000 space. Fairfax, where you're getting, those 10, 15, 20 offers per house. So that's where I spend most of my life these days. But and I've had condos who have gone off the market in 2 weeks. I think it's a matter of space. I think the right condo will sell quickly if it's priced right. I think there is, a little bit more inventory within the condo space. One bedroom condos just aren't selling because people are looking at it and going, if I can afford a 1-bedroom, I can afford a 2-bedroom. Similar kind of idea. So the 2-bedroom market is good still, but it's that kind of that 1-bedroom market where it gets a little tougher. I had a really beautiful 1-bedroom co-op that sold really, really quickly, but it was really beautiful. And then, it's just, it's a little bit tougher in that condo market. But I think as people get more comfortable with communal living, which I think communal living has something to do with the sluggishness in the co-op market and the condo market, because you're living shoulder to shoulder with people during a pandemic, and that's got to be playing into people's psyche a little bit. I think once we start getting a vaccine and getting people, more comfortable with that again, I think the condo market and city living in general will be really popular again.
So my opinion is not entirely different, but I've had probably 90% listings over the last 4 or 5 months.
Lucky you.
One, I do not
looks so haggard,
I
and
know.
she looks so beautiful.
Well, there's gray hair now.
One, I do not envy buyers agents right now. The couple of, purchases I've done have been just like new builds, which is a completely different kind of, part of the market. But the conversation I'm having with literally all of my clients is the subsection of the market conversation, because for multiple reasons. One, because people are reading the same articles that we are, right? That mention those 80 offers or whatever. Some sellers who say own a condo in a big box building, think that it's a strong seller's market for them too. And you have to say, wait a minute, hold on. I would love it to be. However, this is not the same subsection of the market. Um, and so I mean, like, I literally break it down to like multiple levels of subsections, because it's like housing market, then there's like within the beltway, and then there's single family versus townhome versus condo, and then it's, what kind of condo does it have these features, and so people understand their specific area of the market. So with that being said, I think there is a space for continual growth in the larger box building condos, because that's where I've seen the biggest drag over the last year. So places that are very, very urban. So ideally where people wanted to move like 3, 4 years ago, right? Like tons of people on the streets, lots of bars and restaurants. You're definitely taking an elevator, which means you're shoulder to shoulder with people. People aren't jumping at that quite so quickly. I have seen an uptick in it recently, because I think because the vaccine's happening, people are trying to see past the last year. And also they probably have realtors like us saying this kind of stuff to them, like, hey, it's going to, this stuff's going to change. It's going to pick back up. Um, but yeah, but where I've been surprised is all of my listings have been condos. And so I've had varying kinds. Some are more like townhouse style, and some are, like I said, in like the bigger box buildings. And there are still people who stayed here through the pandemic, don't make oodles and oodles of money, and they can only get a one bedroom, right? So the thing is, like, they are still selling. It's just that you have people who, like Michael was talking about, people who are also who can't afford more. Maybe it's two people, so they're looking for a larger space, interest rates are low and all of that. So I think it's just a conversation that we could spend like 15 minutes on each area of the market, or subsection as I keep calling it, to really specifically talk about it, but yeah, so to your question, John, like, I think there is some growth there for the condo market in general. And I've also seen my buyers who are jumping more at the areas that are going to have higher growth rate. So like, without like name dropping neighborhoods, like, a neighborhood that really developed very fast, say 5, 10 years ago, people don't seem to be jumping there as much as the places and the areas where, there's more up and coming construction, building, just things in general, because it's almost like that makes them feel, well, that's helping insulate that subsection of the market. Well, growth is happening here, buildings are going up, apartments or condos or whatever being built around me. That means my property value will likely go up. So even if I'm fighting with somebody, I'm paying 5, 10% over ask, then it's going to grow faster there than it is in the area that developed like very fast 5, 10 years ago. So that's my very long answer to what I think.
Yeah, no, I think that idea, like, I like how you broke it up in subsections. I need to start using that, because in my conversations with people, it really changes based on what they're looking at, right? So it's, what are you looking for? Do you qualify? So you want to, can you? And then, okay, now how do you win? And when I say I think there's opportunity in the condo space, is there were a lot of people, I believe, priced out in the condo space. Maybe their income is in the sub $100,000 range. And before, it was really hard for that person to buy. But then, student loans, that was like the biggest hurdle for them, based on their income. And now all of a sudden they haven't had to make that payment for a year. They've saved up a little bit more money. I've seen more closing help paid, on condos this year in the last few months than I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. So if cash is the limiting factor for a lot of people, I think there can be opportunity in winning and actually getting that structure that you really needed all along, that you couldn't get because the market was hot. And sometimes I think investing in anything is having a little foresight into where you believe things are going. And if you believe that a post-vaccinated world is one where we do get back to near normal, and employers are like, so for me, I know I've hired people through the pandemic, and it's been awful training. And I'm so frustrated with it right now, that I'm like, if we were in an office together, these people I hired, they'd be trained up in 90 days. And here I am 150 days in, and I'm like, oh God, I've got another year of this if we stay this way. Like, I can't wait to get everyone back in the office. And I'm hearing that from law firms, government offices, nonprofits. So I'm hearing a lot of people saying, like, everyone thinks this work remote was great. It was for the people that were already on your team. But then when you think of growing, changing, learning new skills, maybe you lost a person, you need to replace them. That's where all the pain of employment starts. And I think once that switch is flipped, then all of a sudden cities are going to become where everyone needs to be again, because they're not going to want to commute in. They're not going to want to drive an hour, right? All those same things that drove people into the city in 2010, 11, and 12. I think 2022, late 2021, 2022, I think we just see a massive resurgence of that. So I don't know. I would still be pretty bullish in many segments, specifically in the city.
And I'm having that conversation with some of my clients as well, where, they're saying, like, oh, this house is so lovely in, rural areas, that are 45 minutes out of the city. And I'm like, well, it's really hard to gauge, is this too far right now? Because we're not having people over. We're not making that commute. Do you care that you can't get to a bar within walking distance? Not right now, you don't, but you might, 2 years from now.
Or even commute times. Who knows
Yeah.
what commute times are going to be like?
Yeah. Does
Right.
Google,
I
I
mean,
wonder if
traffic
Waze
right now
has,
is lovely.
yeah, I wonder if Waze has, how you could like project how long it takes to get from A to B, like tomorrow morning at 8:00.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can go back in time like 2 years, be like, okay,
Right.
let's go back to 2019, and it would take you this long to get home from work.
Somebody should create that website or an app. That would be like for all city people. That would be brilliant.
Thinking of
Like
moving
when
to the
things
burbs, check
go
this
back to
out.
normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Someone get that URL now. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting going through these conversations with our clients. And I mean, to kind of come full circle and why I wanted to have this topic come up at all was because of the misinformation that is out there. And it comes back to something I've said time and time again on this podcast and outside the podcast, which is like, you really need to trust your team. You really need to trust who you're working with, or at least listen to people who know what they're talking about. So, like the three of us, we're in it, right? We've been in it for a while. We've certainly been working throughout the pandemic from start to where we are now, where we can give a anecdotal and from the ground take on where things are at. And these big terms, even if people don't know exactly what they mean, like a bubble, scares the crap out of people. Right. And so, I want to make sure people know. I mean, my opinion, again, it doesn't, maybe it's not going to be right, but is that we're not. And that, you just need to know what you're getting into. You need to see what subsection of the market you're in. You need to have a plan. Are you staying here for longer than a couple of years? Then, statistically speaking, you're going to get your investment back. Are you thinking about leaving within a couple of years? Frankly, I'd probably never advise that you definitely buy if that was the case, because your break even in DC has up until recently been about 3.5 years. So, would I suggest that? Probably not. If somebody wants to, of course, I'll help them buy a place, right? But so I think it's just really important that we make sure people are properly educated about these things, and that these big terms and these big articles don't scare them.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it comes into play, that people are looking at their aspirational homes as opposed to the homes that they, would have bought if they were here for a short time. So like, these are homes that they are looking at, and they're school districts are important, or space to grow into is important. They want homes that they can grow into, because they're, looking at it and going, okay, interest rates are never going to be this low. So how can I make the most of it right now? And I think that's really what people are looking at. And I think that kind of tends to lean into that we're not in a bubble situation, because a bubble means something's artificially pushing the values up. And right now, what's pushing values up is people want to get that home that they otherwise couldn't afford, is my opinion. So
yeah, they want a change of some sort, right?
Mhm.
And based on their personal factors, financial factors, all the things we've talked about. Well,
Yeah,
guys. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just real quick story, because I always find this to be pretty fascinating. So one thing you said, Allison, was that If someone's not going to be here for more than 2 years, let's say, that's hard to advise them on buying right now, right? Because and even financial advisors, if you sit down with them and say, hey, I've got a couple $100,000 to invest and I want to buy a house in the next 2 years, they put those people in CDs. They're like, it's too risky. Like over a 2-year period of time, it's hard for us to gauge much of anything. What if there's a rogue crash and you lose 30% like that? You're going to hate yourself. Let's just ladder out some CDs. So in housing, I think if you're thinking of getting in and you're still in the back of your mind, like, oh, that's like bubble-licious, and maybe I am going to move in 2 to 3 years. In a few years ago, we took a bunch of houses from current clients that they bought in the peak of 2007. And the story was phenomenal to map out because in 2009, they felt like the biggest idiots in the world, right? They were like, oh my God, I bought a house at the peak. I can't sell it right now because they didn't put any money down. Values have dropped 20%. Oh, what did I do? So then you fast forward, they were able to refinance in 2012 and equity already started rebounding. They were able to refinance again in 2016 and many of them again in 2020 because interest rates kept dropping lower. At the same time, so payments on average dropped about 40% because that's how refinancing works in the future. You locked in the price, but then as rates drop, you can actually lower the payment, which is very different than rent. On the flip side, rents increased about 30 to 40%. So time solves all problems with investing. And I think if you're buying in an area where, generally speaking, rents are pretty easy and the quality of the tenant is strong, meaning good job, good credit, and you're in a transient area where sometimes it's known for people coming in and out, like DC, you can ride out whatever little bumps come our way that is a little unforeseen, just by saying, okay, I'll hold on to it and I'll be a landlord for a little while. So I think that's just another thing to think of is like I had someone going to college here for 4 years and the parents and making zero money. And the parents said, well, we might as well invest in a piece of real estate. Why don't we buy a 2-bedroom condo? You can get a roommate that'll subsidize the payment. Rates are low. We're paying the loan down. And it's a family asset for the future because they know the strength of the DC market long term as a rentable asset is high. So anyway, I just like bringing that out because I think when you overlay decisions over periods of time, back in time, you can start understanding your risk a little bit better. And if you are someone comfortable holding something, buying sooner is always better than buying later or not buying at all, even in hot markets like this.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a good lesson, I think, for all of us, really. Let's pay attention to statistics, right? Like maths and history, and that will help inform us of where things are going in the future. Anyway, I want to thank you both so much for coming on. Hopefully this is a informative podcast episode for lots of people. And thank you all of you for joining in and following along today. Bye, guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
See ya.